Tonight, we begin with a development that Pentagon officials had anticipated, legal experts had warned about, and White House insiders had quietly prepared for. A confrontation that unfolded not over weeks or months, but in a matter of hours. Hours that shifted the political landscape in Washington. Hours that exposed deep fractures in how classified information is handled. Hours that may determine whether a former president faces congressional subpoena. What the Department of Defense did today crossed a line that the Biden legal team had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, the Pentagon did not hesitate. They responded with precision, with legal authority, and with unmistakable urgency. For several months now, there had been signals, not official statements, not formal court filings, just signals that the Pentagon was preparing something unprecedented. The Department of Defense has been methodical, yes, but they have been relentless in their methodology. Their moves have followed a certain rhythm, a predictability, almost a choreography. But what set off alarm bells in congressional oversight committees this week was that the rhythm went silent. Investigators who monitor document compliance know the indicators, the routine status updates, the back-channel negotiations, the informal deadline extensions, the sudden cessation of communication, all of that went quiet. And whenever the Pentagon goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. Early this morning, Defense Department sources confirmed what they described as a formal ultimatum notice, including specific document categories that had not been disclosed in over 18 months. These are the kinds of demands that the Pentagon only issues when they're signaling something very specific. Imminent legal action, congressional escalation, or criminal referral. Congressional investigators didn't know which category this fell into or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that the Pentagon was changing posture. And when the Department of Defense shifts posture without explanation, even by the smallest degree, Capitol Hill pays attention. The ultimatum issued by the Pentagon tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Official after closed door briefing described the Pentagon's move as unprecedented, legally binding, and perhaps most importantly, time-sensitive with specific enforcement mechanisms attached. But ultimatums only work if the target hesitates. Biden's legal team did not. In fact, their response today was among the most aggressive we've seen in modern executive privilege disputes. Here's what we know. Within 6 hours of receiving the Pentagon's formal notice, Biden's attorneys filed a comprehensive legal challenge. These weren't the standard procedural objections. These were constitutional arguments, legal frameworks that Biden's team only deploys when they are preparing to fight this all the way to the courts. Tonight, sources close to the investigation confirmed that the Pentagon demanded access to document categories spanning multiple agencies, including classified briefing materials that had recently been relocated for what analysts believe was strategic legal protection. The Pentagon moved before Biden's team could establish permanent privilege claims. They targeted the Afghanistan withdrawal files. They targeted internal policy memoranda. They targeted communication records that were likely prepared to remain sealed. In other words, the Pentagon targeted the documentary infrastructure. The paper trail that would make the full picture complete. This is what made the Pentagon's warnings so urgent. Biden's document retention wasn't just procedural, it was strategic. It represented the kind of information gap that could complicate congressional oversight if left unaddressed. And the Pentagon, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't demand everything at once. They didn't issue public threats designed for media consumption. They hit the specific categories that matter most. They hit the timelines that reveal decision-making processes. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. Intelligence analysts now believe that Biden's document retention strategy was designed to test the resolve of the current administration after months of political uncertainty. Biden's team wanted to see whether the Pentagon would back down under political pressure. But instead, the opposite happened. the Defense Department didn't retreat. They issued a response that was so comprehensive, so legally airtight, that even Biden's most experienced attorneys noticed. You don't get the Pentagon's full legal weight easily. But today, this situation did. Legal analysts speaking with multiple outlets under anonymity described Biden's position as increasingly untenable, a way to delay but not ultimately prevent disclosure. But the Pentagon proved today that they remain both patient and prepared. Their demands were not only legally sound, they were calibrated so precisely that they anticipated every likely objection. That calibration matters because it shows institutional preparation. It shows that the Pentagon is not merely reacting. They are executing. As reports continued coming in throughout the evening, we learned more about the scale of the Pentagon's demands. Congressional oversight committees carried out parallel document requests, forcing Biden's team to respond on multiple fronts simultaneously. The Inspector General targeted specific personnel records that had been classified in the last 6 months. Intelligence agencies operating through proper channels reportedly requested communication logs used by Biden's national security team to coordinate policy. This wasn't just a document request. This wasn't just a political maneuver. This was institutional coordination. This was systematic pressure. And systematic pressure is the one thing Biden's legal strategy has struggled to withstand since leaving office. For every delay tactic they have employed, investigators have countered with something that narrows their options further. Remember, Biden's team thought executive privilege claims would hold indefinitely. They thought the current administration would avoid confrontation with a former president. They thought political considerations would outweigh investigative priorities. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Executive privilege is being challenged on constitutional grounds. The current administration is actively supporting Pentagon demands. Investigative priorities are clearly taking precedence. What makes this moment so consequential and so unprecedented is that the Pentagon's latest move happened at a time when Biden is under mounting legal pressure. Republicans want full disclosure and potential prosecution. Democrats want to avoid a prolonged constitutional crisis. The intelligence community wants clear precedent for future document handling. The courts want resolution without setting dangerous precedents. Biden is balancing these demands while simultaneously facing separate investigations. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. The Pentagon's ultimatum, now circulating through congressional channels, was designed to signal that the Defense Department is not willing to accept indefinite delays. Officials said plainly that Biden's document retention was inconsistent with established protocols for classified material handling. That is bureaucratic language for, this cannot continue, and we will act. You don't usually hear that tone from the Pentagon unless something serious is at stake. Meanwhile, the Pentagon's spokesperson addressed reporters in a brief, measured statement tonight. They said, the Department of Defense has an obligation to ensure proper handling of all classified materials. They said, we'll have extended every reasonable accommodation to facilitate compliance. And they said, the time for voluntary cooperation has passed. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from an institution that understands just how high the stakes have become. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. The Pentagon's latest move wasn't isolated. Along with the formal ultimatum, congressional investigators also issued preservation notices. The National Archives requested formal status updates. The Justice Department increased coordination targeting specific document categories. All of this happened within the same 72-hour window. When the Pentagon moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. Legal analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that the Pentagon is preparing formal subpoena requests. Another is that investigators are attempting to establish precedent for future cases. A third possibility, the one worrying Biden's team the most, is that the Pentagon is attempting to force disclosure before privilege claims can be fully litigated. But today, the Pentagon took that uncertain off the table. They didn't issue vague warnings. They didn't rely on political pressure. They didn't wait for voluntary compliance. They set a deadline with consequences. What we're watching now is a test of institutional resolve. Biden's team wants to see whether legal challenges can outlast political will. The Pentagon wants to show that classified material protocols transcend politics. Congress wants to prevent this from becoming permanent precedent, and the courts want to prevent constitutional crisis. Tonight, we've heard from sources who are now monitoring Biden's legal team's response. They say internal discussions have become increasingly urgent. They say options are narrowing. And they say the Pentagon's decision to issue a formal ultimatum is likely part of a coordinated strategy intended to force resolution before courts can intervene. But Biden's team is not surrendering. In fact, Biden's attorneys are preparing appeals. Their response today, defiant, comprehensive, and constitutionally grounded, sent a message to the Pentagon that this fight isn't over. And it sent a message to Congress that legal avenues remain. As the investigation continues, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Biden's team hoped to protect. But what we do know is that the Pentagon's ultimatum was timely. It forced the issue into public view. It established clear expectations, and it set the stage for potential enforcement. What happens next will depend on what Biden's legal team does in the next 14 days. If they comply, this moment will be remembered as a turning point. If they resist, the Pentagon has already shown they are prepared. They have shown they are ready to respond. And tonight, for the first time in months, Biden's legal team appears to be recalibrating. Their public statements are measured, too measured. And when attorneys go quiet, it means they are strategizing. It means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because tonight, Biden learned something his predecessors learned before him. The Pentagon does not bluff. Classified material protocols are not negotiable, and ultimatums from the Defense Department come with consequences. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. The Pentagon has drawn its line. Biden must now decide whether to cross it. And America is watching every development unfold. And we will be here watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.